thrown out of a luxury restaurant for looking out of place. The next day, a black SUV pulled up, and no one was ready for who stepped out. Charlotte's sun was doing that thing it does in early spring, brilliant, a little show-offy, bouncing off every glass building downtown. Perfect weather for closing a deal. Cassandra Belton had just finished walking a young couple through their first home, a small 3-bedroom with creaky floors and wild potential. She liked them. Newly married, hard-working, the kind of people who still believed in building things from the ground up. She saw herself in them. At 52, Cassandra had done exactly that. Built something. From scratch. No trust fund, no shortcuts. Just time, persistence, and a refusal to quit. She wasn't flashy. She didn't need to be. Her confidence lived in her walk, in the way she held silence in a room without trying to dominate it. After the showing, she drove 5 minutes up to Le Mistral, a high-end restaurant on Tryon Street. She hadn't planned to eat there. It just popped into her mind as she hit the last traffic light. Treat yourself, Cass. You've earned it. She parked her Lexus, checked her phone, and stepped out. No blazer, just a crisp white tee tucked into tailored dark jeans and a pair of grey suede flats. Her locks were pulled back into a low bun. No makeup except gloss. It was a clean, smart look, something she could wear to a cafe or a boardroom. The hostess gave a quick glance, offered a practiced smile, and led her to a two-top near the window. The lunch crowd hadn't kicked in yet. Cassandra glanced at the menu, already craving the grilled salmon with couscous. Then, before her water even arrived, he appeared. He looked about 38, square jaw, slicked back hair, too much cologne. He wore the kind of smile that tried to hide what was underneath. "Ma'am," he said, walking up beside her table like he'd rehearsed it. "I'm afraid we have a dress code here." Cassandra looked up slowly. "Excuse me." "The restaurant asks for a certain standard. Our guests tend to appreciate a more polished, presentation." She blinked. "I'm wearing clean clothes, I smell like spring, and I just closed a $500,000 sale 2 blocks from here. I'd say I'm pretty polished." A pause. His smile tightened. "We've had concerns." She tilted her head. "Concerns from who?" He glanced toward the front desk, then back to her. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." There was no scene. Cassandra didn't shout. She didn't cry. She asked one question. Quiet. Steady. "Is it my clothes? Or is it my skin?" He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward security. A young guy with visible discomfort walked over and, in a low voice, asked her to gather her things. She stood, picked up her purse, and walked out. No drama, just a silence that clung to every step she took. Outside, she sat in her car, closed the door, and looked straight ahead for a long time. She didn't call anyone. She didn't record a video. But someone else had. From the corner booth by the bar, a woman had watched the whole thing, recorded it, uploaded it, tagged the restaurant, tagged local news, tagged everyone. By sundown, the video had 230,000 views. By midnight, it hit 2.3 million. Cassandra's phone started lighting up. Her assistant, her nephew, clients, even someone from the Charlotte Observer. But she didn't answer. Because Cassandra wasn't going to react. She was going to respond. And those are two very different things. By the time the sun rose over Charlotte the next morning, Le Mistral had a problem. Not a small, quiet problem they could handle with a quick DM or a vague apology. No, this was national. This was loud. The kind of loud that brings lawyers and PR reps into early morning Zoom calls while coffee's still brewing. The video was only 37 seconds long. It opened with a calm black woman sitting by the window, glancing down at her menu. The restaurant looked nearly empty. In the background, you could hear faint silverware clinking, the hum of soft jazz. And then, him, the manager, walking over like he was about to offer a refill. But his posture was all wrong. His voice? Too low, too polite, too stiff. That fake calm people use when they know they're in the wrong, but still want to stay in control. The viewer didn't hear every word, but they caught just enough. "We have a dress code." Concerns ask you to leave. The camera panned slightly to show Cassandra rising, saying nothing, just collecting her purse. And then one quiet sentence. Is it my clothes? Or is it my skin? That was the moment. The entire comment section froze there. Rewound. Watched it again. That line struck people in a way they didn't expect. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't a speech. Just a question. But one that hit like a hammer. Twitter was the first to erupt. Then TikTok. Facebook came next, with those long posts from people who'd been there too. And slowly, people started digging. Who was this woman? Why wasn't she speaking up? Turns out Cassandra Belton wasn't just some random customer. People began connecting dots. She was one of the top black real estate brokers in Mecklenburg County. She had been featured in Charlotte Real Estate Weekly last year. A quiet force. No scandals, no headlines, just a trail of solid business and a reputation for doing right by people. Some of her past clients spoke up. She helped my mum buy her first home after my dad died. One woman posted, didn't charge her full commission, just said she wanted to help. Another wrote, Ms. Belton helped me get out of a shady mortgage situation. She saved me, literally. That woman is grace in human form. Cassandra still hadn't spoken publicly. Reporters camped outside her office near South Park. Her assistant turned them away, politely but firmly. She's not ready to comment. Le Mistral, meanwhile, was spinning. At first, they posted a standard line. We are aware of an incident involving a guest and are reviewing the matter internally. But the internet laughed at that. Review what? The video was clear. The woman didn't yell. She didn't make a scene. She didn't even get through her appetizer. And yet she was escorted out like she'd caused trouble. The restaurant's Yelp and Google pages were flooded with one-star reviews. Didn't know racism was on the menu, one person wrote. Another posted, be careful how you dress, or who you are, apparently. The manager from the video. His name eventually leaked. Owen Linley. He had worked there for 3 years. Former hospitality manager in Naples, Florida. Known for being strict on presentation, according to an archived blog post about restaurant decorum. A former employee from Le Mistral posted anonymously. He did the same thing to a black couple last year, complained about their shoes. They were wearing Ferragamo. As the online storm raged, Cassandra's name trended higher. Still, she stayed silent. It wasn't because she was afraid. It was because she was thinking, calculating. She wasn't interested in becoming a viral face or a symbol. She was thinking long-term. She'd spent her life building something stable, and she wasn't going to let one arrogant manager turn her into a hashtag. That afternoon, she finally sat down at her kitchen table, laptop open, reading quietly. She didn't scroll through the comments. She didn't look at the memes. She looked at one thing, an email from a man she hadn't heard from in years. It read, Cass, saw the video. You handled it like you always do, with quiet strength. If you're ready to do something about this, I can help. It was signed, Harlan Desmond, Managing Partner, Desmond & Klein Civil Rights Law. She stared at the name for a moment, then smiled, because now she wasn't alone. Most people who watched that video saw grace, composure. But if you'd grown up with Cassandra Belton, you'd know where that grace came from, and that it didn't come easy. Cassandra was raised in Southfield, Michigan, just outside of Detroit, by her mother, a retired elementary school teacher, and her father, who worked 35 years at a Chrysler plant. Her parents didn't teach her to be quiet. They taught her to listen. They taught her that calm is a strategy, not a personality trait. Especially when you're a black woman in a world built on assumptions. As a child, she watched her mother correct people with a smile and her father win arguments without raising his voice. She learned to measure her words, to pick her moments, and to let other people's panic show before she showed hers. By the time she was 25, Cassandra had already earned her license and was selling homes during lunch breaks at her banking job. Not the big houses at first, just modest starter homes, fixer-uppers with potential. But people trusted her. She never oversold, never made false promises. She just told the truth in a calm voice and kept showing up. One of her first clients was a newly divorced woman trying to buy her first home on a single income. Cassandra remembered her vividly because the woman broke down crying in her office after closing. "You were the first person who didn't treat me like a mistake," she said. Those moments stuck with her more than the commission checks ever did. So by the time she sat at her kitchen table in Charlotte, reading Harlan Desmond's email, Cassandra wasn't thinking about revenge. She was thinking about how many people wouldn't have handled the restaurant manager's tone the way she did, and how many of them wouldn't have had the benefit of a stranger recording the moment. Harlan was more than a lawyer. They'd known each other in undergrad at Michigan State. He had been loud then, all passion and protest signs. She was quieter, more methodical. But they respected each other, and though they drifted apart over the years, she'd followed his work. Civil rights cases in Oakland, police discrimination suits in Tallahassee. He wasn't flashy in court, but he was devastatingly sharp. She clicked reply. Her message was short. "Let's talk. Tomorrow." The next morning they met at a quiet cafe in Dilworth. Cassandra wore the same white tee and jeans as she did at Le Mistral, like she was sending a message, but one only a few people would get. Harlan was already there, black coffee in hand, eyes scanning the room. He stood when she walked in, didn't comment on the video or the headlines, just nodded toward the seat across from him. "So," he said, "tell me what you want." She thought for a second, then answered, "I want change, but I want it to cost them something." He nodded. "Financial, legal, reputational?" "All of it," she said. He grinned, but it wasn't smug. "Then let's start with the company that owns the building. If they're leasing to Le Mistral, they're liable for what happens on that property." Cassandra leaned forward. "And the manager?" "Let me do some digging," he said. "But yes, there are avenues. You were publicly removed from a business establishment without violating policy. If it was about clothing, that's subjective. If it was about anything else, that's civil." Cassandra sipped her tea, then asked, "What about doing more than just filing a claim? You mean press?" "No," she said. "I mean a conversation, a meeting. Something they're not ready for." He raised his eyebrows. "A sit-down? With me, and a few others." "Who's others?" She smiled faintly. "People who know exactly what it's like to be me, and a few who really don't, but need to." He paused. "You sure?" "I'm done being polite to protect other people's comfort," she said. "They were comfortable when they humiliated me, and now she was done making other people comfortable at her own expense." The following afternoon, lunchtime came with its usual rhythm at Le Mistral. Waiters glided between tables carrying trays of sparkling water and pan-seared halibut. The dining room hummed with clinks and murmurs. Owen Linley, the manager, stood behind the host stand, posture stiff, eyes darting to every corner like he was waiting for something, but didn't know what. Then it happened. A black Cadillac Escalade pulled up in front of the restaurant, its windows so deeply tinted they reflected the sidewalk. At first, no one paid much attention. This was a place where luxury vehicles came and went all day. But the valet hesitated. And when the back door opened, the air seemed to shift just slightly. Cassandra Belton stepped out first. She was dressed almost exactly as she had been the day before, white tee, jeans, suede flats. But now she wore a long beige trench coat over it, and she moved with the quiet certainty of someone who no longer had anything to prove. Behind her, 3 more people exited the vehicle. Harlan Desmond, briefcase in hand. A woman in her 60s with thick silver braids and a serious expression. Dr. Renee Darnell, sociology professor and longtime advocate for racial equity in public spaces. And last, a sharply dressed man in navy slacks and a linen shirt. Andre Weiss, regional director for a high-profile real estate investment group. He wasn't there for press. He was there because his firm owned the building Le Mistral rented. Inside, Owen watched it unfold from behind the glass doors. His face went pale. He turned to his assistant manager and mumbled something about needing to make a call, but it was too late for that. Cassandra didn't wait to be greeted. She walked through the front door like she'd never been removed. This time, she wasn't here to eat. She was here to speak. The maitre d' froze. "Ma'am, we're expected," Cassandra said, her voice smooth but unmistakably firm. Andre stepped forward, nodded at the staff, and added, "Conference room, please, and tell Mr. Linley he should probably be there." The staff didn't argue. 10 minutes later, in the private upstairs room usually reserved for wine tastings and corporate parties, the 5 of them sat around a polished oak table. Water was poured. The door closed. And for the first time, Owen Linley was the one feeling small. Harlan opened a slim folder and laid out a printed copy of the restaurant's dress code. "So," he began, flipping the page. "White t-shirts. Prohibited?" Owen squirmed. "We prefer collared shirts." "Prefer," Harlan repeated, "but not required." "Well, it's about tone, too. Presentation. We have a standard." "Your client," Harlan said, nodding at Cassandra, "is a well-known businesswoman in this community. No signs of intoxication, no disruptive behavior." She sat down, quietly reviewed the menu, and was removed. "Why?" Owen shifted in his seat. "It wasn't personal." "I didn't ask if it was personal," Cassandra said, cutting in for the first time. "I asked myself again and again if I had walked in wearing different skin. Would you have still done the same thing?" Silence. A heavy one. Andre leaned forward. "We're not just here to talk. This is a lease violation. This restaurant operates under a non-discrimination clause as part of our leasing terms. You may be the manager, Mr. Linley, but I represent the entity that owns this building. And we're reviewing your status." Owen's mouth opened, but no words came. Dr. Darnell spoke next. "This isn't about just one woman being turned away. This is about the message sent when silence is mistaken for weakness. You didn't expect her to come back, did you? You thought that moment would fade away. But she didn't need to shout to be heard. She just needed to stand still long enough for the world to see you." Owen tried to deflect. "Look, if she wants an apology—" "I don't want your apology," Cassandra said. "I want accountability, and a change in how people are treated here. Not just me. Everyone." There was no yelling, no legal threats, just 5 people who knew exactly what they were doing, and one man who suddenly realized he wasn't in charge anymore. Owen Linley sat still, shoulders pulled tight, the knot of his tie tugging slightly against his throat. He was used to being in control. In most rooms, his voice carried weight, firm, final. But in this room, with these people, it didn't carry the same force. Not anymore. Harlan Desmond leaned back in his chair, letting the silence stretch. Then he placed 2 sheets of paper on the table. "Page 1, he said. "A list of complaints filed by former staff and guests at this establishment over the past 18 months. Several of them reference dress code enforcement. One includes a direct mention of you, Mr. Linley." Owen didn't reach for the paper. "Page 2, Harlan continued, sliding the second sheet forward, "is a draft of a formal letter that could be submitted to your building's management and passed on to local media. It outlines how bias, whether conscious or not, has been a pattern, not a one-time error." Owen began. "No one's looking for you to grovel," Cassandra interrupted, her tone steady. "This isn't a vendetta. It's about fixing something. If you're smart, you'll stop seeing this as an attack and start seeing it as a chance to make it right." Dr. Darnell spoke next. "We live in a city trying to present itself as progressive, inclusive, and globally aware. But incidents like this pull the curtain back. The issue isn't that you made a mistake. It's what you choose to do after the mistake was made." Andre Weiss, who had stayed mostly quiet until now, finally leaned forward. "The board that oversees this property will be meeting next week. We'll be reviewing your lease. Cassandra's situation may be the one on video, but we'll be considering the broader pattern. That includes staff turnover, guest feedback, and public fallout." Owen's voice cracked slightly when he finally said, What do you want?" Cassandra looked him in the eye. "Public apology. Not a templated statement from your PR firm. Your voice, your face. Own it." Owen blinked. "That's okay. I can do that." Next, Cassandra continued, I want to meet with the staff, front and back of house, not to lecture, to talk about what hospitality really means, what dignity means. Owen nodded slowly, but Harlan raised a hand. That means a formal arrangement, not a photo op, no cameras, just people learning how not to repeat the same mistake. And lastly, Cassandra added, I want the restaurant to fund a quarterly dining program that offers free culinary experiences to underserved high school students interested in the food industry. Front of house, back of house, all of it. Let them taste what it's like to be welcomed where they usually feel excluded. Owen hesitated. That's a lot. It's fair, Andre said, before Cassandra could respond. Frankly, if it were up to me alone, I'd recommend terminating the lease entirely. So I'd consider this a gift. The weight in the room shifted, not because it got heavier, but because Owen finally understood the scale of what was happening. This wasn't about him. It was about what he represented. And what Cassandra was doing was bigger than a response. It was a redefinition. He swallowed hard, then said, Okay, I'll do it. No, Cassandra replied, her voice even. You'll start it. The difference matters. The group stood slowly. Papers were collected. Water glasses half empty. The room felt strangely calm. But not empty. Something had happened here. Something shifted. As they exited the conference room, a young waitress caught Cassandra's eye. Couldn't have been more than 23. She didn't say anything, just gave a tiny nod of acknowledgement. Not out of pity, but respect. Cassandra smiled back, just enough to let her know she saw her too. And downstairs, as the main dining room continued serving truffle risotto and wine, a change was already in motion, whether the restaurant knew it or not. The restaurant's apology video went live the next morning. It was short, just under 2 minutes. Shot inside Le Mistral's main dining room, with the bar in the background. Owen Linley stood in front of a small round table, shoulders square but face drawn. No dramatic lighting, no flashy editing. Just a man who looked like he hadn't slept well in days. My name is Owen Linley, he began. And I want to speak directly to Ms. Cassandra Belton, and to anyone who saw the video of our interaction. He didn't read from a script. That was clear. His words fumbled at times, but the stumbles made it harder to dismiss. He admitted the truth, that he made a judgment based on appearance, that he reacted instead of thinking, that he allowed personal bias to override policy and professionalism. And then he said the thing no one expected. I didn't see her. Not really. And that's the problem. The internet lit up within seconds. People had questions. Was the apology genuine? Too late? A calculated move? But what struck most viewers wasn't Owen. It was Cassandra, who posted a written statement an hour later. It wasn't long. Just 4 paragraphs on her business website. No hashtags, no viral tone. She didn't gloat. She didn't demand sympathy. She simply laid out what had happened, what she had asked for, and what the restaurant had agreed to do. She passagely mentioned the new program for aspiring culinary students and thanked the restaurant's ownership group for working with her directly. Then, in the last line, she wrote, "Dignity isn't something you demand. It's something you carry. And when it's denied, you don't always need to fight to get it back. Sometimes you just need to stand still long enough for people to see it was always there." The post spread even faster than the video. Cassandra's inbox flooded again, but now it was different. Local nonprofits reached out asking to partner with her on the Student Dining Initiative. A restaurant group in Seattle asked if she'd speak to their leadership. Even the mayor's office sent a quiet message thanking her for how she handled things. But not everyone was supportive. A few voices claimed she was making it about race, or taking advantage of the moment. One commentator on a local news segment accused her of trying to cancel a hard-working manager. Cassandra didn't reply to any of it. Instead, she focused on the students. The first event took place just 3 weeks later. 15 high school juniors and seniors from West Charlotte and Harding University High arrived at Le Mistral after hours, escorted by their culinary arts teachers. The staff had cleaned the kitchen to a shine. 3 chefs volunteered their time to teach the students how to plate, prep, and serve. Cassandra didn't speak much that night. She moved from table to table, watching them slice, stir, and taste with wide eyes. One girl, barely 5 feet tall with purple braids and serious focus, turned to her after sampling her first attempt at risotto. "I didn't even know food could taste like this." Cassandra smiled. "It can. And so can opportunity." Meanwhile, Owen wasn't at the restaurant that evening. He'd been removed from day-to-day operations after the incident, now serving in a limited administrative role at the corporate office. No dramatic firing, just quiet consequence. Exactly the kind Cassandra had aimed for. She wasn't interested in ruining someone's life. She wanted them to live with the reminder. And that reminder now lived in the form of 15 eager young students, laughing and learning inside a restaurant that had once tried to shut someone like them out. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same place that had dismissed Cassandra for not fitting the atmosphere was now being transformed by her presence. One table, one lesson at a time. 2 months later, Cassandra stood outside a quiet little cafe in Durham, North Carolina, sipping a cortado while waiting for her lunch date. She wasn't there for business. She'd taken the day off, driven 2 hours from Charlotte just to clear her head and catch up with an old friend. The whole Le Mistral situation was behind her now. Mostly. The video had faded from trending lists. The restaurant had stabilized under a new interim manager. And the student culinary program? Still running, with another session scheduled next month. Cassandra had decided not to oversee it directly anymore. It belonged to the students now. As she sat beneath the awning, sunlight spilling across the pavement, a young woman in a UNC hoodie walked by, slowed down, and turned back. "Excuse me, are you Cassandra Belton?" Cassandra looked up, nodded once. The girl smiled wide. "I saw your video, the one with the restaurant thing. I just wanted to say thank you. You kept it real. Like grown woman real," Cassandra laughed softly. "That's one way to put it. No, seriously. You made a point without making a mess. My aunt talks about you like you're Michelle Obama's older cousin." They both laughed this time. The girl waved goodbye, still smiling. Cassandra didn't need validation. But that moment, that offhanded compliment, meant something. Not because of flattery, but because it told her the right people were paying attention. The next generation was watching how things were handled. Later that afternoon, she walked into a small bistro across the street for lunch. The host, a white man in his 20s with a nose ring and slightly frayed cuffs on his sleeves, looked up and gave her a genuine smile. "Welcome. You dining alone or expecting someone?" "Alone," she said. "Window seat okay?" "Perfect." He grabbed a menu and led her to a booth with sunlight cutting across the table. No hesitation. No second glance at her outfit. Today it was a simple linen shirt and cream-colored slacks. When he left to get her water, Cassandra glanced around the restaurant. A couple arguing softly near the back. 2 women sharing a dessert. A man on his laptop typing fast like the world was about to end. Normal, ordinary, beautiful in its simplicity. She thought back to that day at Le Mistral, the way Owen Linley's face changed, the quiet support she received, the critics too, the weight of being made a moment when all she wanted was lunch. She didn't regret any of it, because that moment had taught her and reminded others that silence isn't the absence of strength. Sometimes it's the deepest kind of strength, the kind that listens, that waits, that watches for the right time to move. And when it moves, it doesn't ask for permission. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app, typed a sentence at the top of a new page. "Don't waste your voice on noise. Save it for the echo." She'd heard that from her mother years ago. It didn't mean stay quiet. It meant be strategic, be surgical. Use your presence like a scalpel, not a hammer. When the waiter returned with her water and a gentle, "Take your time," Cassandra smiled. She didn't need to make a point today. She didn't need to prove anything. She'd already done that. And in doing so, she left a mark not just on a restaurant, but on every person who watched her hold her ground without stomping, who saw what it looked like to choose dignity over drama and still win. That was the lesson. You don't always need to shout to change the room. You just have to stay standing long enough for people to hear what silence really says. If this story made you feel something, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Talk about it. And if you're not already subscribed, hit that button, because more stories like this, the quiet ones that speak loudest, are on the way.